So let me introduce myself. My name is Giuseppina Tucci. I am the current president of the Lifelong Learning Platform, and I am extremely pleased to welcome you all to the 2021 edition of the Lifelong Learning Week. This 11th edition of the week is dedicated to the topic of rethinking assessment, prioritizing learners' well-being and the changing nature of evaluation in education and its impact on learners' well-being. I know this is a long title, but bear with us as we explore it all together throughout today and the rest of the week. We are glad that MEP Victor Negrescu is hosting this week's LLLWeek. Being a strong supporter of lifelong learning and a key player in the debates around education and its accessibility throughout Europe, we are extremely glad that you are here with us today and that we're looking forward to hearing some of your thoughts in a minute. The last year, or better so, the last two, have pushed us all to take stocks of the impact that education systems can have on personal well-being. We have seen parents juggling care, work, and education even more than before during lockdowns, students in all levels of education struggling to keep up with the Zoom fatigue. We ourselves have been struggling with the Zoom fatigues, teachers having to swiftly change their teaching methods in a matter of days, and we overall witnessed the power of education and its shortcomings, of course. The pandemic, however, was only the peak of the iceberg. Over the last decade, education has been under a constant pressure to privatize, spend less, and perform better to feed the labor market. At the same time, we have all witnessed a rise in populist and far-right movement, which call for education system to refocus its education around global citizenship education, soft skills, and more generally, a need to have a more global approach to lifelong learning as being much more than a buzzword and an actual practice. This is why throughout this week, we have lots of discussion stored for you. We will have several workshops, panel discussions, and debates around the issues of digital well-being for all actors, assessment of learning outcomes when coming back from a period abroad, or assessment of learning outcomes in craftsmanship, funding education for well-being, the well-being of civil society workers and workplaces in general, formative assessment, the commodification of education through assessment, and much more. This is to say, we know you don't know where to start, but please have a look at the program and try to join these sessions. They are worth the online Zoom fatigue, I promise. This week is also an opportunity to celebrate the constant engagement of civil society in education and training policies and to showcase the several initiatives that education stakeholders can do to put in place and create a change for lifelong learning. So one big shout out goes out to all the members of the Lifelong Learning Platform that organized several activities this week and that continue to engage and promote a change in education system, even in these difficult times. Another big shout out goes to our Secretariat and the Steering Committee of the Lifelong Learning Platform for making this week possible. We will be looking forward to engaging with you and for your support throughout the week. Now, without further ado and trying to recuperate on the delay, let me introduce to you Victor Negrescu and pass him the word for its initial remarks. Thank you very much. Victor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Giuseppina, and I would like to say hello to everyone. I'm really glad to be in this position of let's say, organizing with you this important week of conferences, debating a complicated topic, but an interesting topic at the same time. Because to be very frank, when we refer to education, when we refer to lifelong learning, we rarely focus on the issue of well-being. And the fact that you decided this week, your organization, is to raise this important issue at European level, I think for me, it's very interesting. It's very interesting because, of course, the pandemic has shown us the challenges that we're facing with regards to lifelong learning across Europe. But in the same time, the pandemic has underlined once more the need to focus on learners, on educators, on the environment for learning and education. So therefore, of course, we need to prioritize well-being in the process of learning. And of course, this shouldn't be a simple declaration. It should be about underlining how we can do that and identifying key tools, key instruments, and of course, in the same time, the investment that are required to improve the well-being of the educational environment. And of course, in your drafting documents, in your discussions till now, you often mention the importance of trying to have a 360-degree approach when it comes to lifelong learning. And yeah, the issue of well-being, in my opinion, is that key concept that will enable us to do so. So of course, well-being in the current context imply a lot. Imply, of course, like you said very well, and this is mentioned in the title of this week of conferences and meetings, the issue of assessment. Making assessment something that invite the learner, stimulate the learner to try to learn more. It shouldn't be a moment that creates further stress. It should be a moment that enables him to measure his performance, what he has managed to gain in terms of experience and in terms of know-how. And of course, it will imply, of course, to adapt maybe how we are currently doing assessment of learning in different learning frameworks. This means, of course, integrate better, maybe why not, the non-formal parts of learning and education. This means, of course, in the same time, to adapt that experience of assessment in a digital environment, which is not so easy, because if you look at the polls and the statistics, many of the learners that were part of digital classes are sometimes underlining the lack of, let's say, clarity when it comes to their assessment due to this new environment. So we need to see what has been done in a positive way in different places in the world, and of course, in the same time, discuss about potential methods to do that. So I'm certain that we are going to hear during this week about many interesting experiences and ways to do that. In the same time, of course, assessment and well-being goes together with prioritizing investment in lifelong learning. I want to mention that because I think we, at European level, often mention the need to do more for lifelong learning, but I will sometimes also fear that we are not actually doing enough. We are not focusing enough our resources available at European, national, and local level in a coherent framework that will enable us to improve the impact that we are having when it comes to the level of training and education of European citizens. So I also believe that this goes together in the same time, and that means, of course, assessing, directing, analyzing, and in the same time, making sure that the money that we are investing, the fund that we're investing also in the recovery plan framework, has an impact on those two sides, well-being and better assessment, better quality of training, lifelong learning, education. So I think in this regard, and what I expect, and I hope that you will manage to achieve during this week, is to also come up with instruments, suggestions, methodologies, indicators of performance, of the investment, of assessment, of well-being that can be taken on board by decision makers at European level, in my case, but also at national, local level, because we need that. We need those standards to be well-defined and very clear. And we need those standards that come from the civil society, that come from you, to be highlighted in the European semester format. Because if you look at the semester format in the national report, we see very interesting inputs, but sometimes this is what I feel, that there isn't, a clear homogeneous perspective on what is happening across Europe. And such indicators, such methodologies, such a framework of designing well-being and lifelong learning, in designing assessment in a better way, in a digital environment at the same time, this will enable us to do more on that. This is why, as Vice President of the Culture and Education Committee in the European Parliament, I asked my colleagues, and hopefully will achieve that, to have a report, an own initiative report on this idea of well-being, impact of the pandemic on the psychological side, on the educational environment, on the learning environment. So we are still negotiating, so I need your support for that. In the same time, I convinced my colleagues, and I'm really happy that we managed to do that, to do an assessment, to do a study. So the European Parliament is going to study this issue of well-being. To be very frank, I took a little bit the topic from you and adapted it to our environment in the European Parliament. So hopefully that study will help us to continue the conversation, to give more visibility to this topic and to give more visibility to you and your partners and your members. I really appreciate our interactions. We work really, really good together. So I'm really happy to be part of this week together with you and to give it more visibility and try to show support for all of your activities. So thank you again for having me with you. I hope that I can have an active contribution during the entire week. And yeah, let's raise the visibility on this issue of well-being and assessment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for these words. Of course, you can count on our support when it comes to co-designing and shaping any policy that concerns education and training. And of course, we are also very interested in further discussing the issue of investment in lifelong learning. I think this is a very timely matter, and we look forward to cooperating further with you. I'm going to now ask Andrea if we are ready for our next video speaker. Unfortunately, Themis Christophidou, Director General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, could not be with us today, but she sent a video message. So I'm going to ask Andrea if it is possible to share it.
Honourable Member of the European Parliament, dear Victor Negrescu, dear President Tutsi, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for me to take part in the launch event of the Lifelong Learning Week. Today's event focuses on the issue of well-being at school, and in particular, the links between assessment methods and learners' and educators' well-being. The issue of well-being at school is not new, but has become very prominent with confinement and prolonged school closures over the past year and a half. Even before the pandemic, PISA 2018 data showed that pupils' sense of belonging to school was declining, and bullying was a serious issue. The pandemic made these challenges harder to address. With many children and young people suffering from prolonged isolation, they lacked interactions with teachers and their peers. Over the last year and a half, many of us experienced anxiety and stress, but pupils, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, felt it even more. 10 to 20% of children and adolescents experience mental disorders such as anxiety and depression. They need support to address their mental health, especially when exposed to more stressful home environments. Without feeling welcome at school, we cannot expect learners to do well or to want to stay there. The well-being of teachers is equally important and can affect the well-being of our children. Recent reports indicate that in the EU, almost 50% of teachers in lower secondary education experience stress in their work, generally linked to their working conditions. Teachers' burnout is also on the rise. The pandemic did not help, given the strain it put on educators for a rapid shift online. So, what is the Commission doing to help Member States enhance well-being for pupils and teachers? Firstly, we need to look at the evidence. PISA data indicate that students' well-being, including the sense of belonging and levels of bullying at school, have strong effects on students' academic performance. Unfortunately, bullying appears to be widespread in the EU, with more than 50% of students having experienced it. Therefore, it is important that we take a closer look at the situation on the ground and take actions to address this issue. This is why this year's edition of the European Education and Training Monitor will take an in-depth look on well-being. Secondly, in the frame of the European education area, we're delivering an initiative called Pathways to School Success. This proposal for a Council recommendation aims to develop, in cooperation with Member States, policy guidance to help all pupils reach a certain level of proficiency in basic skills and to complete upper secondary education. Of course, we're not starting from scratch. We're building, for example, on the work of the ET 2020 working groups. With this initiative, we take a systemic, whole-school approach to school success, one that is based on cross-sectoral cooperation and multidisciplinarity, fully embedding aspects like mental health, socio-emotional learning, and fighting bullying in all its actions. Second, next year, we're establishing an expert group on promoting supportive learning environments and for supporting well-being at school. This expert group will specifically propose policy recommendations on promoting mental health and well-being and for preventing bullying and violence at school. It will also enhance effective uptake of successful practices in schools and propose awareness-raising activities at EU and at national level. Finally, I would like to point to a recently published European framework for the development of the social, personal, and learning key competences called LifeComp. It focuses on well-being, self-regulation, flexibility, empathy, communication, teamwork, and critical thinking. It is a valuable reference tool for teachers, learners, and stakeholders. The Commission continues its development with teaching strategies and application in schools across Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, when learners feel well at school, they do well at school. When schools build positive and caring environments, promoting social and emotional competences, school results show. Assessment methods are key issues for enhancing well-being and are at the core of our activities. I'm very happy that your discussion today will contribute to these important initiatives. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for showing the video, and thank you to Director General Christophidou for the message. Of course, one of the key messages also of the position paper that we will later present is that when learners feel good, they do well. When they feel well, they do well. There is a lot more to it than it, and we look forward to engaging also with the initiatives of the European Commission to promote well-being in all learning environments, in formal, non-formal, and informal learning, of course. At this point, I would like to pass the floor to our keynote speaker, Professor Michael O'Leary from the Dublin City University. He's Prometic Chair of Assessment and Director of the Center for Assessment Research, Policy and Practice in Education. I hope I said Prometic well, because it was a nightmare. I don't think Prometic, it was a bit of an issue. The floor is yours.
You said it perfectly. Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. So somebody needs to give me permission to share my screen.
You should have it now.
Thank you. Perfect. Can you all see my screen? Great, thank you so much. So thank you again for the invitation to be here today. I'm privileged, honored, and delighted to be able to talk to you about what I hope will be an interesting case study looking at assessment and student well-being. The case study comes from Ireland, and it comes from a high-stakes assessment context. Very peculiar to Ireland. In actual fact, my colleague here in the university, Professor Anne Looney, and I were presenting to our government committee a couple of weeks ago, and she spoke about how culturally embedded assessment can be, and particular examples of assessment sometimes don't translate well to other countries or other contexts. But I'm hoping that what I'm going to say to you today about assessment and student well-being will give you a really good case study to talk about when you talk about the impact of assessment on student well-being. I think we have a really, really interesting story to tell. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then we will have, I hope, 10 minutes to for questions and answers. So to set the context, in Ireland, we have, sorry, to set the context, I just wanted to say that my presentation was in 4 parts. I'm going to talk about the impact on student well-being of high-stakes assessment in Ireland. Then I'm going to talk about the revolution that was brought about by the pandemic in high-stakes assessment in Ireland. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the implications for student well-being of that particular revolution, and then give you some observations Maybe there are more observations than conclusions. All of this is so new and so recent that we still have to make up our minds about what exactly has happened over the last 18 months, 2 years, especially in Ireland. So the context is our Leaving Certificate examination. It has been in place in post-primary education in Ireland since 1925. So it's got quite the history. In actual fact, my father did it in 1931. I did it in 1975, and my son did it in 2010. And as I watched my son prepare for this particular exam at the end of post-primary education, I was really struck about the fact that his experience of doing that exam was very similar to mine. And Irish people, if you talk to them about, and I'm sure Alex is here, Alex will appreciate this. People often talk about having dreams about their Leaving Certificate examination. And these dreams sometimes are nightmares. So we have a very interesting exam. It is mostly paper and pencil. The photograph will give you an example or a good indication of what the students look like when they're doing the exam. It happens each June, and it follows the completion of the senior cycle program when students are about 18 years of age. You can see there that they go into a room, they sit socially distanced with exam papers, and everyone gets the same paper, and they do the exam for 2 hours or 3 hours. And it's a very important exam. The results are linked to a points system called the CAO. The CAO stands for the Central Applications Office. And the points that you get as a result of your results are used to determine entry to higher education, and also from this year into further education and training. The Leaving Certificate is high stakes. It's a very important exam for trying to get into whatever course you want to do, especially getting into very competitive courses in higher education. It's very high profile. Another very interesting thing about this exam in Ireland is that it occupies a lot of space in our media. So every June, they will talk about the exam, what exam is on today. And the following day, they will talk about what was on the exam yesterday. And somebody was explaining recently that it's such a big deal that even our traffic reports in the morning will have a warning to students if there's a traffic problem, to make sure that the students get there on time. So it really occupies quite a lot of media space. It also has high public trust. The sense that this exam is fair comes from the fact that all the students do the exam on the same day, and it's marked anonymously. So they do the same exam, more or less, and then all the papers are marked anonymously. So no student's name is on a paper, so there's no bias as such. And while I was preparing this presentation, I found this quote, and I couldn't remember, I wrote it down sometime in the past, and I couldn't find out who I should be attributing the quote to, but I think it really captures what our Leaving Certificate is about. It said, "What would you want other than a brutally competitive and completely anonymous end of year school test?" And there are some of us in Ireland who would react like this to that particular statement. That's my friend from Norway. Now, the impact of the Leaving Certificate, and I'm going to talk about different kinds of impacts. This comes from research. There are really two stories to the research on the impact of the Leaving Certificate in Ireland. The first is that it dominates teaching and learning in the final 2 years of post-primary education. And the second thing is that it is stressful for students. There are many reports I could quote from, but I've just taken these two. They come from the Economic and Social Research Institute in Ireland, who do very good research on education. And I'm going to read the one because I think the one that's there, I'm going to read it out loud because I think it really captures what the issue is. It says the research provides useful insights into the way in which the current mode of assessment at Leaving Certificate contributes to high levels of stress among young people, particularly girls. The high stakes nature of the exam, with results influencing access to higher education and employment, further contributes to it being seen as a case of all or nothing in June when you do that exam. Coupled with other findings that show how the dominance of the exam narrows student experience of teaching and learning, the results point to the need for further debate on the nature of the assessment at senior cycle. This is a report that was completed for our our Department of Education in May of 2020 as an advice document advising our Department of Education about what to do in case our Leaving Cert was going to be cancelled. But it provides a really useful insight into assessment and well-being in Irish education. It's completed by the National Educational Psychological Service, and it's called The Wellbeing and Mental Health of Young People in Ireland, Factors for Consideration for the Leaving Certificate Examination in the Context of the COVID-19 Pandemic. And it says, this paper sets out what we know from the research literature about the mental health and well-being of young people in Ireland prior to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. In essence, the known level of mental health difficulties across young people in Ireland is already concerning at around 33%. In addition, Irish young people experience significantly higher levels of schoolwork-related anxiety and significantly lower rates of well-being than do their OECD counterparts, together with high levels of examination-related anxiety. I bet you now you're glad you didn't come through the Irish education system. As I was explaining about social media, I think this also captures, what a place this exam holds in the Irish psyche. And the amount of concern there has been about student well-being. And this time I'm going to give you examples from the media, and I'm going to focus on our national newspapers. So the first one is the Irish Times. And all of these would be headlines from the various newspapers in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. It says over half Leaving Cert pupils have mental or physical health issues due to the exam. Students giving up sports and social activities due to Leaving Cert pressure. Leaving Cert pressure hurt cultural activity in young. And Leaving Cert needs mammoth overhaul to reduce students' anxiety, say principals. Another Irish newspaper, the Irish Examiner. This is a quote from the Ombudsman for Children, Dr. Niall Muldoon. He points to a 2016 Commission on the Rights of Children report, which recommended the reform of the Leaving Cert due to the disproportionate level of mental stress experienced in young people. And then finally, another one of our major national newspapers, it says, Leaving Cert 2019, now this is before the pandemic, students urged to put well-being above grades. So I think you get the idea. So why not change the thing? And it's a very reasonable question. It's been there for almost 100 years. Numerous attempts have been made to change it. And my job really is not to go into all the different reasons why it hasn't been changed, but it hasn't been changed. But the most recent effort to change it started in 2017, where it has been the Leaving Cert examination, the LCE, and the senior cycle program have been under review. And just before the pandemic, the OECD did an assessment of the senior cycle review. So big folks from the OECD came in to do an evaluation of the review itself. The review is being carried out by the National Council for Curriculum Assessment in Ireland, and the OECD came in. And I think this quote, which I took from this report that was published in December 2020, captures some of the underlying problems we had with trying to reform the Leaving Certificate. It says, even when convinced of the need for change in senior cycle education, stakeholders tend to disagree on the nature and scope of the change, which makes finding common solutions considerably more challenging. So, despite the fact that this particular assessment in a high stakes context, which determines, young people's life chances, is incredibly stressful, has a lot of negative consequences. It's been a very difficult thing to try and reform, extremely difficult. And then came the pandemic. And the pandemic has changed so many things in a way that 3 years ago we could never have foreseen. And one of the things that it changed in Ireland was that for the first time in almost 100 years, the Leaving Cert was cancelled. I like emojis. So what I'm trying to do here is capture, the fact that that was unimaginable, that the Leaving Cert would be cancelled. And if you look at the date, May 2020, it was cancelled. I think it was cancelled around the middle of May. The exams usually start at the beginning of June. So it took our government a really long time to cancel it because they were trying to find ways of postponing it, delaying it, finding options. There was all kinds of debate in Ireland. They really tried really hard to go ahead with it, but it was cancelled and it was replaced by calculated grades. And calculated grades was a combination of two things: a school-based teacher judgment or estimate of a percentage mark for each of their own students in a particular subject. So if you were a teacher of English, you gave your student, say Giuseppina was an English student, we gave her, she's really bright, she's really high achieving, so we give her the highest grade, clearly. And then that particular judgment then had to be standardized or moderated nationally. So there were two processes. So all the schools put all their data together and then submitted it to another body that did the standardization. And the students got a grade. This was really historic because for the first time, Irish post-primary teachers were involved in assessing their own students for certification purposes. Now, for certification purposes is key here. They said, in the past, Irish teachers said they would never get involved in assessing their own students for certification purposes, which makes Ireland an interesting case as well, in that many countries, like the Scandinavian countries, Queensland and Australia, teachers are centrally involved in the assessment of their own students for certification purposes at the end of post-primary education. But in Ireland, no, they said they would never do that, but they did. And the world did not cave in. Now, the point is, the reason I've spent so much time here trying to give you a really good sense of the impact on well-being of an assessment system was that when that assessment system was taken apart dramatically, fundamentally, very interesting results, very interesting outcomes can be seen from something that could never have been foreseen. What we see is, and these are really relatively recent research studies. This one here on screen comes from the Maynooth University in Ireland, and its title is The Class of 2020, The Experience of Leaving Certificate Students During COVID-19 in Ireland. And the figure on the right is their feelings about the cancelled Leaving Certificate examination. There were about 959 students involved in this. It's a voluntary sample. It's not a representative sample, but it's a voluntary sample. 44% were happy, 31% were moderately happy, and 25% were unsure or unhappy. Okay, so worth thinking about this. You know, I suppose, given how negative the Leaving Cert can be, the fact that maybe you didn't get 100% response is interesting. Now, I think earlier we were talking about disadvantaged groups. This is a study in Trinity College in Dublin, and it's post-primary students' perspectives on teaching and learning during COVID-19, during the COVID-19 school closures. And these are students from disadvantaged schools in Ireland. And the figure relates to students' agreement with the cancellation of the state examinations. Now, on the right-hand side of the figure are the agreement figures. So you have an agreement figure of strongly agree 23, agree 27, so that makes up 50%. Another 28% neither agree nor disagree, and about 23%, well, exactly 23%, but roughly the same as the previous study, saying they disagreed with the cancellation. So what happened in 2021? So what happened this year? And this is the story. This is really the most important piece of my story today, I think. So what happened in 2021 was that we had a system of accredited grades, very similar to calculated grades. Small differences, but more or less the same thing. So teachers grading their students and then having some moderation of their grades. But this ran in parallel with the traditional exams in June 2021. So, and the student body in Ireland were vocal in calling for the dual option, for giving students a choice. And so our Minister for Education, before the exam, when this was announced that there was going to be exams and accredited grades, the word choice was used a lot. And the vast majority of students took an accredited grade and sat at least one exam. My nephew, who has exams do not suit him, let me put it that way. In Ireland, students take between 6 and 7 exams for Leaving Cert. He actually took one exam, which was in music, and then he took an accredited grade from his teacher in all the others. And then the nice thing for the students was that they could choose the higher of the 2 grades. And this process led to a much calmer affair altogether than in 2020. The calculated grades was quite a change, but in 2021, much more calm. And the impact of this, sorry, go back. This is a website called Spinout. It's developed by young people for young people. And if you go on, you will see different stories about different aspects. Well-being and mental health forms quite a bit of the content. But this is an article written by a young woman called Rebecca. And she talks about why getting accredited grades is the right decision for her and for her mental health. Now, significantly, in the Irish Times, this, I think, was one of the most striking headlines as a result. This is from 2021, so this after the Leaving Cert. What it says is that Leaving Cert students' stress levels virtually disappeared due to assessments. The school managers say there is a compelling case for reform of Ireland's dated senior cycle. But from the Irish Examiner, managing accredited grades proves stressful for 6 in 10 principals. So I just wanted to put that in to say that certainly we have the evidence to suggest that the students benefited enormously from the dual system. But the dual system put quite a lot of pressure and stress on the teachers and on the principals. So I'm coming to the end of my story, and what I'd like you to take away is that Ireland in 2020 and 2021 was quite unique in the world. Irish people always feel they're unique in the world, but in this case, this particular case is true. Ireland was alone in fully implementing calculated grades. the system fell apart in the UK, in Scotland, then in England, then in Wales, and then in Northern Ireland. But in Ireland, we managed to see it through. And the dual system of accredited grades and exams in 2021 was unique to Ireland. And we have some empirical and quite a lot of anecdotal evidence of less stress on students, which is very good news. However, and this is something maybe we can debate in the questions and answers, there's no guarantee that other forms of assessment for high-stake certification purposes will eliminate issues around student well-being in Ireland. I'm talking here about the fact that proposals are being made to spread exams across 2 years and to have continuous assessments. But that in and of itself doesn't guarantee that the stress will be just spread out across a longer period of time. And then we must remember as well, the early indications is that 1 in 4 students may prefer exams. So maybe that was the reason why the dual system in Ireland works so well, is that some students actually were less stressed about the fact that they had to do exams. Now, interestingly enough, the plan is to go back to the normal Leaving Cert exam in 2022. And my reaction to that? I better not say anything. Some of the sources, if you're interested in any of the sources, please contact me. But if you wanted to, I'm sure the presentation can be made available to you. And we have some interesting research on our website related to other elements or other research we do in well-being. At the moment, we're doing a really interesting project looking at an assessment of students' knowledge about well-being at the early years of post-primary education. And that is an assessment for learning that we are currently pilot testing. If you want to find out more, you can certainly go onto our website. So thank you very much for listening. I'll be happy to respond and open the conversation up.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the very insightful conversation and for calling me bright and over high achieving. Nobody ever did this to me in school, so I'm very happy that someone did it today publicly and I streamed on Facebook. We don't have, unfortunately, a lot of time left. We're running a bit behind, but I'd be happy if there are some questions to take 2 or 3 in a round, and then Michael, you could answer all of them together. Georg, I see you wanted to come in with a question.
Yes, indeed. Michael, I'm from the network of the Steiner schools in Europe, the European Council for Steiner Waldorf Education. We are very interested in more personalized forms of assessment and have recently completed a project on that. Now, you reported that Ireland is planning to go back to the Leaving Cert after the positive experience that you have described. And I was wondering, what is the main reason for going back? Is that that it's more difficult to administer, or are there also reasons that claim that it's better for the students?
Thank you, Georg. While we wait for any other question, if anybody wants to raise their hand, I also have a question. I was wondering, because you mentioned that 25% of students still reported to be unhappy or unsure in both of the, let's say, researches that were carried out. I was wondering if you think there could be a correlation between that and the fact that overall there could be a fear that not doing the Leaving Cert makes you less of a student or less worthy in the labor market or in higher education afterwards, whether there's any pattern that you can see there. And Faride, I see you have your microphone on. Would you like to come in with a question?
Yes, thanks. I would like to ask Michael whether in this research there has been any rather insight into the quality of learning, whether the learning certificate is much more qualitatively assessed or in calculated grade. Have you really tried to compare the two from the viewpoint of the quality of learning outcomes of the students? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not see more hands raised, so I would suggest, Michael, that you take these 3 questions, and then if you can stay with us a bit longer, maybe there are
Sure.
more
Yeah.
Just to say that if anybody has questions, you can pop them also in the chat, and I'm sure Michael might be, I'm not sure, but he might be happy to answer some of them in written.
Okay. The reason for going back, there are many reasons for going back. If you remember what I put up about the OECD, there's a group, and certainly not everyone agrees with the calculated grades. The teacher unions were quite opposed to doing the calculated grades and said that they only agreed to do calculated grades as a one-off emergency procedure. So they would be quite influential in saying that teachers are not going to do calculated grades unless it's absolutely necessary. So I think it was a sort of a pragmatic decision to go back in 2022 to the old Leaving Cert. But it's also true that the report on the reform of the Leaving Cert is going to be published pretty soon. And I think it's pretty clear that starting in the near future, there will be a system of reform that going forward really reforms and makes fairly substantial reforms to the Leaving Cert. But the reason for going back in 2022 is quite pragmatic, I think. It's that, and there is a group of students as well who say, look, we've been preparing to do a certain kind of exam, and we just prefer to go and do that exam. I mean, there's a student body that would also say that despite the pressure. But I think it's just purely pragmatics, even though it's fairly complex. There's a lot of complex reasons behind why the government would have decided to go back. But they'll go back. But in a sense, there's no going back. I think we are in for major reform in Ireland in the near future. The question around the, what was the second? Sorry, I've lost the second question. I can't even read my own notes. The issue on the quality of learning is a really good question. I mean, there's a real big disconnect between the nature of the aspired learning, what people want our students to learn, and then the way we examine them. So our Leaving Cert tends to reward fairly low level, kind of rote learning, knowledge type work. Not all of the assessments now, to be fair, but there is a disconnect. So the feeling was that the calculated grades and the accredited grades, that when teachers were making judgments about the students, that they took a wider range of learning into account than our exam would. And that's why the teacher grades tended to be higher. Now, we know from research that teachers tend to overestimate their students' achievement, their exam achievement anyway. But there was a sense that from the research that we've done in CARPE, that the teachers took quite a lot of learning outcomes into account in arriving at a grade, a broader range of learning outcomes than would have been the case in an exam. Gosh, I can't remember what the second one, I wrote a note on the second one, but it had something to do with students and I can't remember what it was. Does somebody want to repeat that question?
No, it was just whether you thought there is a correlation between the fact that they don't want the exam, like they feel unhappy about not taking the exam, and the fact that they maybe feel pressured for.
Yes, so yes, the quality, that there would be an element of that in it. I mean, I said at the very beginning that the Leaving Cert is quite culturally embedded in Ireland, and it has currency and it has high levels of trust. So that would be true in a sense, that people would find that a teacher's grade doesn't mean as much as the grade you got from doing a real exam. Yeah. That certainly was articulated as an issue in Ireland.
Thanks a lot, Professor Leary, and the other speakers as well. I'm going to take over for the moderation of the following panel. My name is Elisa, Vice President of the LLLP, and it's a great pleasure to be the moderator for the panel now and the following very interactive and final session of this launch event. So we have a great group of speakers that I'm sure would be also inspired and their interventions informed by the keynote speech that we just listened to. And I'm really pleased that today we can have with us, of course, our President, Giuseppina Tucci, will continue staying with us in the panel, as well as I'm happy Victor Negrescu can continue this conversation with us now, but also David Acho Arena, Director of the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, Alison Crabb, Head of Unit for Skills and Qualifications in DG EMPOL, and also Marie-Anne Persons, Vice Chair of the Council of Europe Steering Committee for Educational Policy and Practice. So welcome you all, and thanks for joining this panel and event. I would like to start by giving the floor to Josefina once again to present the results of the annual position paper of the LLP and the key recommendations.
Thank you very much, Elisa, and I hope you're not too tired of my voice already. It is with very great pleasure that I can introduce to you the position paper and the policy recommendations that we have been working on. And again, I would like to extend a massive thank you to our Secretariat for supporting us so much in this work and for editing and creating and carrying out a lot of the work connected to this. Now, I said it before when we started the discussion, education in the last couple of years, of the last decade or so, it has been under constant pressure to become more and more similar to an industry, very much profit led, a very big source of competition. We have been going through many more ways of rank educational institutions. We have at this very moment several different scales and rankings of which university performs better, which school performs better, and all of this. And all of this makes us get the picture that education has one role, and that role is to perform, and that one other role is to prepare learners for the labor market. Of course, one of the big, let's say, purposes of education is to prepare people for the labor market, but it is not only that. And I think this picture and this rhetoric results into very negative figures. We can report that 47% of educators in the EU report quite a bit or a lot of stress at work. 60% of students report feeling tense while studying for exam, and these do not seem to be numbers that support very much the idea that education is meant for well-being. Now, this narrative, as I said before, that education is a tool for the labor market and the rhetoric of the skills for jobs kind of makes us think, and it also meant in practice, that well-being took a backseat rather than a front one. However, we do need to remind ourselves that the purpose of education is to add quality of life to a person's life. And we need to remind ourselves this every day and every single moment, to remember that enhancing well-being at this point in education is not an accessory, but is a need. And we have seen this throughout the pandemic, as I mentioned before. We now have the opportunity to revert the trend and think about putting education in the front seat. The pandemic has sharpened social inequality, has put those at the margins even more at the margins, and those who work towards the center now at the margins. We do need to work on making the quality of life of all these people better and include them into lifelong learning. It's not only an accessory, as I said, but an imperative that we have. We have all witnessed the shortcomings of the current assessment system throughout Europe. Michael O'Leary gave a brilliant example from Ireland. We've seen this mainly in the formal sector, but we've seen education systems really struggling to adapt to new methodologies and to trying to integrate, for example, good practices from the non-formal and from the non-formal sector into their teaching practices, with learning millions of learners unsure about their futures and unsure about what they can do in terms of learning and training, education and training. Education cannot make people sick, learners sick, and I think we can all agree on that. Now, with this preamble in mind, we have come up with a set of recommendations that we would like to propose so that we can have a holistic discussion and around assessment and well-being. And they are going to be very soon available, but let me present some of them to you. So first of all, we would like assessment to be a catalyst for well-being and not stress. Stress does not only have short-term effects, but it does have long-term effects, and the fragmentation of well-being into the different sides of it can have very deep effects on learners. We do not want education to be to make students sick, as I said. Secondly, we believe assessment must be moving with the times, and we must be able to integrate new assessment methods into learning environments for the 21st centuries. We need assessment that is connected to real life, that makes people practice their real life and practice all the knowledge that they get into their daily life into assessment to be able for them to participate fully in society. And we need to consider learning from the non-formal sector on that. There are many practices in terms of evaluation that we can learn from for the formal sector. Thirdly, we need to be able to harness digital technology to advance innovation, and we need assessment to take into account many different aspects. We need increased flexibility, creativity, and innovation in assessment, and we cannot anymore rely so much on standardized tests that are not suitable for exploiting the full potentials of all learners, particularly in the digital age. As we heard, the Living Certificate in Ireland being done with a pen and with the pencil and paper, I think in 2022 we can do better than that. We need to make the shoe fit. So we need to align assessment to the curriculum. We need to shift to competency-oriented and outcome-based approaches to assessment to be able to consider the full picture and also to be able to consider the impact on the well-being of both sectors and educators at the same time. Learning, moreover, and we can all agree on, depends a lot on our educational experiences. Creating assessment methods that apply and that are inclusive for everyone allow us to also have less people disconnecting from education and training, and would help reduce early school leaving and dropping out of education more generally. We need to be able, as I said, to enjoy learning and to keep learning. And we need to break the vicious circle of assessment inequality. There are several forms of assessments which are not suitable for everyone. They amplify and sharpen the gap that we have in society between more disadvantaged and more privileged people, those with disabilities, those with a migrant background, and those with a lower socioeconomic backgrounds suffer from the consequences of standardized testing as well as from the ones of non-personalized assessment.
Wait, I'm disconnecting stuff.
No! Someone is disconnecting.
Shut up. Okay. Isn't this what?
Sorry, someone is disconnecting things. We hopefully not this and not the whole event. Let's say our 8th policy recommendation. I'm just going to mute people. Sorry. Our 8th policy recommendation regards the accessibility of STEM subjects for women. Women want to be in science, but the barriers that also we face through assessment are not very little. So we do need to encourage women to want to study the subjects through also personalized assessment, again, to ensure a diverse STEM workforce, reduce the gender pay gap, and empower more and more women throughout Europe. The last 2 policy recommendations regard the issue of allowing educators the space and freedom to decide what they teach and assess to a certain extent, specifically because the autonomy in assessment can help teachers and educators to be better and more adapted assessment methods which respond better to the learner's needs. And as we always advocate for as the lifelong learning platform, education should be learner-centered. Last but not least, we need to strengthen universal access to lifelong learning. As I said before, assessment cannot be a tool to evaluate performance of education, the sole tool to evaluate performance of education institutions, because this results into much more, again, gaps between more privileged and less privileged schools, and because it endangers the very mission of lifelong learning and its universal access for everyone. Again, learning entitlements throughout life should be protected from results-oriented policies that effectively neglect the learner's well-being. Aside from these recommendations, the position paper looks at a very big number of good practices, including personal portfolios, the importance of validation of non-formal and informal learning, the relevance of formative assessment and gamification, and much more. Again, we invite you to have a look at it and get to know some of these practices. And this is why we don't only urge educational institutions to look into assessment when planning education reforms, but also we stress the importance of doing so in strong synergy with civil society organizations, because we practice change and potential solutions to our dilemmas every day. And we would really like to participate in co-designing education reforms that take into account the well-being of learners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pina. And indeed, I believe we started addressing the invite by Victor as well to share suggestions and recommendations also for policymakers to be able to take them on board and further elaborate. And indeed, what I'm going to do next is asking all panelists for a first reaction to these recommendations from our annual position paper. But first, I would like also to let participants know that they will have the chance to ask the questions to the speakers later on, but if they wish, they can also share them in the chat, of course. So I would now like to start with David, if you agree. I hope I didn't butcher your surname before. If I did, apologies for that. And we'd like to hear your first reactions to what Pina just shared in a couple of minutes, if possible. This will apply to all. David, the floor is yours, if you like.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for inviting UNESCO for me to take part in this event. It's indeed a very topical subject. It's an important area. It's very much connected to the broad approach and movement that has been initiated already a number of years ago towards making really education systems learner-centered, and that has implications for content, for pedagogy, and we see through this work that it has also a lot of very important implications for assessment. I think that the evidence that has been gathered for building this paper and the presentation we've just heard from Michael O'Leary shows clearly that assessment has a very strong impact on the well-being of learners, and that assessment systems can generate a lot of stress, I would say negative stress. An important dimension also relates to its impact on inequalities. I think that it's quite important to take note of the fact that this impact is actually worse for girls and women. So it amplifies gender disparity. It also amplifies other types of inequalities. So that's another dimension to look at it, the impact of assessment on inequities. I'd like to just stress maybe 4 areas which I think of particular, resonance and interest in the recommendations. And I think that both are directions that UNESCO supports also very much. First of all, really making assessment more formative. And to involve as much as possible the learner in the assessment processes, including through developing forms of self-assessments. I mean, there are examples in the report on how this can be done. Moving also from an approach based on disciplines in different areas of learning in curricula to an approach based on competencies, which can lead to a different type of assessment mechanism. It's also important, considering the negative impact that assessment can have on well-being and its impact on stress, to include in the assessment systems also indicators that actually allow to monitor the level of well-being of learners. And I think this is something that really deserves much work and probably further research. I'd like also to add to...
David, may I ask you to wrap up?
Yes, just also to stress the fact that it's important to look at learners, but also on teachers. Again, we saw it in the example from Ireland, that assessment systems also have an impact on the level of stress of teachers. And then finally, from the point of view of lifelong learning, the importance of taking really a lifelong approach. Looking at well-being of learners right from the start, from early childhood care and development, right from adult education and learning. So I think it's important to have this broad perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I didn't say before, so it wasn't that helpful, but for the other speakers, I will do like this when it's 1 minute left, so you have a better idea. And I would like to ask for reaction also to Victor. Next. Thank you. We can't hear you. Maybe we can continue with Alison, if that's fine with you. And then in the meantime, I'm sure we can sort the technical problem.
Thank you, Elisa, and I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for the invitation to join the session. Very, very interesting. I mean, I think I will be, I know time is of the essence, so let me just zoom in on maybe two key messages that really struck me from your position paper. And of course, David has mentioned them among his points. First, very striking for me is, as ever in this field, the importance of validation, of continuing to make progress in actually making access to adequate tailored validation opportunities a reality for all learners. I think that message came through very strongly from your position paper, and something which, together with member states, with civil society, with social partners, we continue to take forward. And the second one is perhaps you know, a very general message about universal access, tailored provision. I guess that's a strong message that comes through this position paper, and it's one, if we have time later this afternoon, I'm very happy to come back to how in the next couple of weeks from the Commission side we would like to put forward a proposal to make that more of a reality. But certainly this idea of tailoring, which underpins all of this work. Giuseppina used the term, and the paper uses the term, make the shoe fit. I think that's a very neat way of summing it up when we're talking about tailoring, whether it's assessment methods, whether it's curriculum design, whether it's the type of validation arrangement that we're opening up for people who want to pursue validation. This idea of fit and tailoring, you know, so important. So those are maybe just the first two ideas that I would highlight.
There will surely be the opportunity to elaborate more on that, of course, but thanks a lot, Victor. Let's give it another try. It's still not there, unfortunately, but I have confidence it will be. For now, we'll give the floor, and also that he will come back to the meeting, I'm sure. But I'll give the floor first to Marianne then, and again, apologies to you as well if I butchered your surname in any way. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much. I will try to speak from the perspective of the Council of Europe, although I have, of course, also a national background working for the Department of Education and Training of the Flemish Community of Belgium. But nonetheless, first of all, congratulations for the very interesting document. And what struck me in particular was your very wide definition of well-being, not the narrow definition that we sometimes see in texts that are inspired by, let's say, human capital vision on education, but rather the broader let's say, clusters of external conditions that help individuals and communities to reach full potential and flourish. And in fact, that resonates well with the vision of the Council of Europe on education. The vision of the Council of Europe is a rights-based vision on education, the right to education in all its richness and diversity. That means that it's coupled to a wider, broad definition of the missions of education. There is, of course, the preparation for the world of work. We cannot cut this out, but there is also the personal fulfillment. There is the preparation for democratic participation in society. And education also contributes to the advancement of the knowledge base of society. And it is in this wide view that you also can develop a wide vision on what well-being is. Well-being for the individual, but also for the school community, where teachers, students, parents, the whole community around it cooperate, come together, meet each other, and cooperate. When the Council of Europe speaks of well-being, well, they usually will look at framework conditions at the first place, exercising the rights of students and staff, the autonomy of teachers, academic freedom, absence of violence. Don't forget that the Council of Europe has a lot of experience in building up a school system after violent conflict. Then everything which has to do with qualifications, recognition of qualifications, inclusion of vulnerable groups, and of course the approach to curriculum and assessment, not as an isolated thing, but in the whole life of the school community. And indeed, your report and your recommendations go very well with this kind of approach, and therefore also very useful. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And normally third time's a charm. So I'm sure Victor now will be able to share with us his reaction.
Yeah, I hope it's
perfect.
Fine.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like well-being, you know, it's well-being, and what happened to me is really connected to a certain degree, of course, because of course, in order to be heard, in order for things to work in the learning process, you need people to feel well. So indeed, the policy recommendations, in my opinion, are really good, and they can represent, let's say, a good basis for a clear discussion about this at European and national level. And of course, the definition is the key element, again, in what you're proposing, but in the same time, I think you are raising an interesting issue that maybe should be underlined better, is adapting assessment, personalizing assessment based on the topics that learners are learning, based on the particularities of the learners, based on the context, based on the environment, digital or offline environment. So really, I think this is something that needs to be underlined in today's discussion even further. How can we tailor educational learning and adapt it based on learners and based on educators in the same time, but in the same time do this personalization without harming, let's say, the structural framework of learning and education that also works to a certain degree. So this is quite difficult, and we noticed that in the speech of our guest speaker today, how difficult it was for Ireland. So it's really difficult for everyone. So I think really the recommendations are really good. I will try to take them on board in my activity in the European Parliament, but in the same time, I think they open a clear discussion about how to actually do it. And I think this is something that needs to, let's say, more reflection, and I hope that we will do that during this week.
Thank you very much, also for being mindful of the time, of course. We know that Alison will absolutely have to leave, unfortunately, at 5 sharp. So I will start the next round of questions with her to make sure we can get her insights, and we hope, of course, we can anyway conclude this panel discussion by 5 so that she can stay with us till the end. So Alison, my question for you would be about PISA assessment in particular, and how is PISA assessing well-being, in fact, and how does the skills agenda also contribute to such a development?
Thanks, Elisa. In fact, I think what I wanted to focus on in the very short time I have is a look ahead to next week's Commission proposal on individual learning accounts. All I would say on, I won't speak on PISA, I'm not qualified to do so from my adult skills perspective, but from PIAC, which of course you know all about, the adult competence dimension. There, of course, in the background questionnaire, there are questions around the way in which the respondents assess their health situation, for example, their political efficacy, I think is the term used. So there are some dimensions in that exercise. PISA, I'm afraid I'm not the one to speak on that. But just maybe what I wanted to quickly flag as I look ahead to this question of opening up universal access and tailoring it to the needs of the wider learning population. Just a reminder that on the 8th of December, the Commission will adopt its proposal on individual learning accounts. So in other words, an entitlement attached to a person taking with them throughout their adult life, regardless of employment status, active, inactive, self-employed, platform worker, or whatever the person's labour market status is. Why do we think that this is an interesting way forward? Really to uncouple, let's say, the very close traditional relationship between employers and people on full-time non-limited employment contracts, to look beyond that, to complement that, to open up the perspective of how all adults are able to both find and take up opportunities to engage in the learning that they need. Perhaps I know it's challenging to have so little time because all the issues that have come up this afternoon, we could spend a long time discussing, but I think I would like to make the point, which I know platform members and myself and Commission colleagues often discuss, that there is no thick black line between skills for the labour market and other skills. And I think that's such an important message also to take this afternoon, that however we learn, wherever we learn and whatever we learn, it's coming together to equip us both for an active role as citizens and hopefully for a fulfilling work situation. So when we talk about the relevant learning for adults that we want to promote, that is a message which I think I would want to strongly underline, that I know that I'm speaking to a great extent to the converted. We're not thinking in silos. We're taking the widest possible look at learning and the value of learning. So perhaps that's just one main message I want to highlight this afternoon, that I think we share very much the views of the platform when it comes to opening up learning environments, giving that learning the right value, and perhaps the topic of this afternoon, tailoring these opportunities in a way, whether it's content or assessment methods, tailoring that in a way which meets the very diverse needs of adults, in order really to get a step closer to a genuine lifelong learning culture. Thank you for passing me the floor first of all, Elisa, and very curious to hear other panelists' key points.
Thank you very much, Alice. And indeed, there's so many reflections that can be sparked from this initial interventions that in a way we take a whole week to do that, right? So that's the aim also of the LLLWeek and the 15 events that are going to animate it. I would like to go next to David and ask him if Wellbeing is gaining momentum on the international level from your point of view, and if there is a chance for assessment to be rethought.
Yes, indeed, and I would like maybe to recall that the concept of the definition of learning as a joy is something which is very central to adult education and learning. You may recall that it was already part of the discussion in Confintea 5 in Hamburg and Confintea 6 in Belém. So as we are actually laying the ground from the next Confintea that will take place next year in Morocco, I mean, now this is a dimension that remains central. I mean, adult education and the motivation for learning throughout life requires also some level of enjoyment. And this capacity to enjoy learning must be nurtured right from the at a very early age, as I was saying, right from preschool, and of course throughout the education system. And unfortunately, what we have been seeing at international level, if we look at the most performing, the best performing education systems, again looking at PISA results, there are also systems where by and large students are, we can say unhappy. So there is a high level of performance, but often low levels of happiness or well-being. And this led to an initiative and a movement that grew up in Asia, and UNESCO was key in promoting that, the so-called happy school approach, which was actually meant to reverse, this culture of learning, which is also linked to a culture of assessment, what makes learning, in fact, very competitive and sometimes very painful, to change the culture, to transform it into an enjoyable experience. And UNESCO developed, I would say, really a whole school approach, because assessment is one dimension, but well-being is also determined by other dimensions, by pedagogy, by content, by the school environment itself. We heard about bullying, for instance, which can be a major issue. So having a whole school approach to well-being is something very important. And indeed, at international level, this is something which is being, growing attention, together with looking at the non-cognitive dimensions of learning. So socio-emotional intelligence, for instance, is being given increasingly, high importance, but we still need to develop appropriate tools to assess this dimension, and also include it in the national assessment systems. So, because one aspect is about the modalities of the assessment, but another important aspect is about the scope. I mean, what is being assessed?
Thank you very much. Indeed, a very important question when discussing this topic, right? And another important question, we believe, Victor, this will be addressed to you. If you see the current EU agenda for education integrating the lessons learned from the pandemic, or not really, and in particular, how is the EU addressing online assessments?
I think the issue is reflected partially, of course, in the European Union, let's say, perspective on digital education, and also in the European Parliament report that I helped draft. We have introduced the issue of online assessment and the need to have, let's say, an analysis of what is happening, making sure that the specific assessment really is valid. This is really important. Recognized, this is also a second element. And of course, that the online and digital assessment, let's say, is integrated in the educational process, in the learning process, in an open and transparent manner. So this is really important for learners to be aware of what is going to happen and how they're going to be assessed, and how the digital version of assessment currently being implemented in pandemic times really corresponds to a qualitative process. But in the same time, I'm worried a little bit about that, because the European Union has made recommendations, the Parliament got involved, but member states, not all, really took into consideration those recommendations, really focused enough on this important matter. And we noticed, of course, when we had the lockdown, that some systems decided to digitalize the process, some decided to delay assessment, some decided, of course, to adapt their physical assessment, some decided to reduce the quality and of the assessment process. It happened, and it still happens today. And we see, of course, with the new challenges, with the fifth wave, with the new variant, and so forth, that we need to really think about that in a more coherent way. So my idea would be, and maybe we can raise this issue, to have a discussion about that also in the Council, making sure the ministers are also really focusing on this issue, discussing about that and seeing how they can integrate that in a better way in the future, because I feel that this will be a challenge in the future as well. So we really need to have a broader perspective on how to adapt assessment in the digital environment, in the current context, but also improve the assessment process in order, and this is something important in your document, assessment shouldn't be a stress. Assessment should be a validation of the performance of the learner, of the quality of the learner, and should make the learner happy about, succeeding, if it succeeds, of course, but about being tested about his or she's performance. I think this is the way to go. It's not easy, it's not simple, but also I think it's about explaining the assessment and all of that. So it's a complicated feature, but I think we should do more about that at European level indeed.
Thank you very much, Victor. Alison, I know you have to leave soon, so let me thank you once again for joining us, and please feel free to leave when you have to, of course. And in a way, bridging also from your last intervention, Victor, to my next question, I would like Marie-Anne to comment and let us know what you think when we talk about the efforts of taking into account well-being when reflecting on assessments. What is the role of teachers in this?
Also speaking a little bit from the work program of the Council of Europe and what we have done facing the COVID crisis. You mustn't forget that the Council of Europe is the Europe-wide organization focusing on democracy, human rights, and rule of law. So this is always the main focus when we build up our program. And we were very worried that the sanitary crisis could lead to a crisis in democracy. We see all kinds of evolutions in our society. We see more polarization. We see also more anxiety, which could also lead, could be translated in some political reactions, etc., etc. And the question is then, what can education do to secure that democracy, which is necessary for learners to thrive? So that was, I think, the most important thing. And then we looked, or we continue to look at education as a community, where teachers and students are in the same community, where assessment is necessary, but which should reflect a certain vision on education, on the curriculum, on the way we live at school. This whole of school approach is extremely important, not just the isolated curriculum items. Now, the whole picture, the whole person also of the learner should be addressed, just like the examples you gave in your report, where in fact you trigger the student to be creative, to apply different talents that they have, and to develop them, and to bring them to a synthesis in the assessment or the essay or what have you that they present. And this remains extremely important. On the other hand, we also realize that assessment should be relatively structured as well, because it can be linked to qualifications, and qualifications are a ticket for a successful transition to society. And especially we have several actions, for instance, to recognition of qualifications and competences of migrants, adult migrants, linguistic integration, things like that. But I have to say, we don't have a particular policy on well-being or a particular policy on assessment. It's all connected to each other, and we see assessment as one of the aspects in a broader story.
Thank you. Then in this case, maybe also this position paper can spark reflections for any future position to be taken in that venue as well. Happy to be involved indeed. And I would like to know if any participant has any questions for this amazing group of speakers with us today. If I'm correct, Professor O'Leary wanted to share a remark, but I don't see the hand raised. I see Chiara's though, so please, Chiara, if you, and I do see also Professor O'Leary now, so let's take Chiara's and then Professor O'Leary's questions.
Hi to all. I'm Chiara for Learning for Wellbeing Foundation, and as mentioned from my foundation, we care a lot about well-being, and we have a definition as well-being as the realizing of our own unique potential in terms of mental, social, emotional, and also spiritual development of each person. And so we care a lot of the development, the emotional development, social development of every learners, that is as child and as adult, I mean, in the lifelong learning process. So my question is, could we, as I appreciate a lot, we appreciate a lot the mention of Mr. Negrescu about the quality of the learners, and quality of the learners is also the way how they learn and all the emotional involvement that the learning process implies. So could we try to include in the curricula and the assessment process also a way to assess this aspect of the development of the learner as agent of learning and change? And that's it. So taking care of the emotional part of the learners, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. Would you like all speakers to address this question, or because also to be mindful of the time, maybe we want to pick one? You can also think about it, and it's for the chat. Then we also have a question in the chat. This is the following, also for recording purposes. I'm gonna read it out loud. Could you provide some functional indicators for measuring well-being of students? And then we have Russell with the question as well. So in the meantime, I invite speakers to think about the questions that were asked so far. Russell, please, floor is yours. Michael, let me know if I had understood correctly that you also wish to have the floor or not. Okay. Russell, please.
I'll lower my hand in a minute. I'm just trying to do too many things at once here. It's replying to Michael and other colleagues. There is a saying that we use in health, and I'm sure you're well aware of it, that it's easier to build a child than it is to repair an adult. And I'm the CEO of a health organisation in the UK, and we spend a lot of time now on the built environment, and I was a director of the Design and Mental Health Network for 10 years, and how important that therapeutic environment is, and introducing creativity into the environment. But we seem to have missed that with children. We kind of wait until they become the adult that needs repairing. And I personally have that experience. I mean, I'm of an age that I came out of school with no qualifications. I did terribly in exams, but I became successful in business. I entered the world of academia. I became a university honorary fellow. I've got an EU vet virtual ambassador role. But if this had been based on my exam results at the time, I'd have done terrible. And my teachers were quite disappointed that I'd done really bad in the exam, because they expected great things of me based on my enthusiasm and creativity in the classroom. But sadly, when I got that pencil in my hand and that piece of paper in front of me, it didn't then turn out to be the results that everybody expected me to get. So I do firmly believe in what Michael was pointing out, that if you can assess a child over many years, and I'm quite fortunate to be married to a retired primary school teacher. And I think it was Sir Ken Robinson that said, the late Sir Ken Robinson, we've been teaching creativity out of children for too many years. And over the years of being married to my wife and supporting her in primary schools, we used to see that creativity disappearing off the curriculum. And it became more about trying to achieve success in exams and trying to get the school up league tables. And the children have almost got missed behind in that process. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Thanks. Give the floor next to Michael and then Georg, and then I'm sorry, but I need to move on with the next part of the session after we let the speakers address the questions, of course.
Thanks, Elisa. I just wanted to come in just to congratulate the group on a really fine position paper. I think it raises lots and lots of interesting points. I'd just like to focus maybe on that point 5, which is lifelong learning depends on positive educational experiences and assessments have a part to play. I think my presentation earlier was trying to advocate a little bit for teacher assessment agency, so the involvement of teachers in the assessment of their own students. I think that's something we've learned in Ireland. It is a bit of a shock to think we're going back, but I want to raise another issue with the group, which I'm very passionate about, and that's student assessment agency. Is that often what's missing in documents is the logical conclusion of the democratic ideal of involving the learners in their learning actively, but we don't involve them, not really, in their assessment. So one of the things I wanted to advocate for today is that the group would also consider how we can change assessment by including the lifelong learning skill of self-assessment. Because without self-assessment, lifelong learning is problematic. And it's amazing how many documents do not make that connection between self-assessment and lifelong learning. And I'm not talking about low stakes self-assessment, because that's important. That's where young kids learn to do their assessment. But sometimes we also need to think about how do we engage learners in high stakes assessment that affect their life chances? How do they make a contribution, a real contribution, not just a contribution that kind of goes, the teacher's judgment is what's going to matter here, or the exam is what's going to matter here. How do we get some of our assessment systems to be more balanced? And how do we involve our students or our learners in making important decisions that affect their life chances? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Georg.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to react again to what already was implicitly in many of the comments heard before, that it will be very crucial to more and more try to find the evidence for learning in the actual classroom situations. I think there's a wonderful term calling this naturally occurring evidence. And I would advocate on behalf of the Waldorf movement for looking much more in this direction, how the teacher can become the detective who tries to find this natural occurring evidence in the classroom for the learning taking place. I wanted to extend an invitation as well on this occasion, because we recently closed our project together with the Learning for Wellbeing Foundation on assessment as dialogue, and we heard that the learners are important, they should be involved. So we have actually conceptualized that as dialogue between the learners, the teachers, the parents. And this book that I'm holding up that we present on Friday in one of the events here presents a lot of practices from assessment practices from all levels of education that also focus on this dialogue with the learners. So please join us on Friday for this event, and please take into account.
Thank you, Georg.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. So I'll give the floor to each speaker for 1 minute max. I'm sorry, but we're running a bit behind with the schedule, and we don't want the members to leave the meeting just because they have other commitments, and you as well, of course. So also thank you for your patience for staying this long already. Marianne, would you like to start for the questions that you believe you're...
Yeah, I will give it a try. When I saw one question in the chat where there was asked whether there was a kind of evidence or a special assessment to know whether there is well-being at school. I think we should be a bit careful, to put up large-scale assessments as a solution for everything. I think PISA is the best example, where indeed some countries have a very good score in PISA, but we know that well-being is maybe not so terrific in these countries. And there is also a very strong focusing on so-called evidence, but this evidence is usually very limited. While education is a very complex process with a lot of interaction, which you will not easily catch in a simple assessment. So therefore, I think we should go in the direction of assessments that are, as was proposed in your paper, tailor-made, taking into account the context, the community, the fact that you don't learn on your own, but that you are in a community, which is not the case when you have all these large-scale assessments where they look at the score of the individual or what have you. So maybe we should be much broader and accept that there is not one size fits all, but different way of approaching that growing human being that you have in your school, and that becomes yeah, a part of our society, of our community, etc.
Thank you. David, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Very quickly, maybe three points. I mean, first of all, this discussion about assessment and well-being and the negative, I would say, impact of assessment on well-being, I think must be also related to the broad regime that has been governing our education systems. I mean, they are, you know, still very much driven on an approach which is based on competition between learners, competition between institutions, and therefore it's difficult to actually transform assessment systems unless there is also progress towards building a new approach where the principle is more around collaboration between learners rather than on competition. So I think that we need to keep that in mind. Secondly, I think that there is a lot to be learned from adult education, non-formal education. In your report, you did point out to a number of method experiences through which assessment can be conducted in different ways, I would say non-conventional ways. So I think that there is much to be learned from those experiences and see how they can be adapted to a school system. And the third point relates to COVID-19. I mean, we heard from the experience in Ireland that this crisis has forced countries to actually reform their assessment mechanisms. So there is a lot of lessons to be learned, I think, at international level. I think that we need to explore how those innovations that were actually developed in different parts of the world can actually bring sources of inspiration to reform assessment systems. And I hope that what we've heard from Ireland, where now we're going back to the old system, may not be actually the case for all parts of the world. So in other words, learning from COVID-19, I think, will be also quite interesting to guide countries in how to reform assessment systems and probably, you know, improve the link between assessment and well-being of learners.
Thanks a lot, David. There's also a comment for you in the chat, I see. And yes, from Marianne, in fact, also. Victor, what's your take on the questions that were asked?
I think what is clear is that we need to redefine or rethink, as is mentioned in the title of our conference, the question and the concept of well-being for learners, but also for educators. We don't have such a common approach at European level. Yeah, we are investing we always ask for more resources, and I believe that we need more resources for education and learning. But I think we also need to fix some targets, raise the bar of what we want for learning, the quality of learning, but also the quality of the environment for learning, in a digital environment, also in an offline environment. So we need to think very well of that, to have clear quality indicators for all of those elements, starting with assessment that, of course, needs to be very performant, and in the same time enabling us, of course, to have a clear recognition of the assessment. A clear recognition of the assessment process means a clear recognition also of the value of the diplomas and certificates. So everything is interlinked. So I really think we need to identify, again, everything that is related to this concept of well-being, from how the classroom looks, from how the trainer is being trained, him or herself, from the assessment to the digital platform that we are using for learning, from again, the perception of the learner to, again, the quality of the certificate. So it's really an intensive and in-depth discussion that is needed on that. I'm really happy that I'm part of this, and hearing all the speakers and everyone intervening really show that there is hope and there is a lot of ideas about how to do that. Because at the beginning, I was a little bit worried that it's really complicated. But now, after our discussion today, I feel that we are on the right path. And as a decision maker in the field, I only hope that all the other decision makers are ready to hear the different perspective offered by your guests today, and really integrate that in the decision-making process. So thank you for having me here, and I was really happy to be part of the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. Same here, as for the happiness to have you as a host for this LLL week and as a guest for this afternoon. And same, of course, for Marianne and David and Alison, although she had to leave a bit earlier. So thanks a lot once again. It was really inspiring and I think insightful to hear your remarks. We're now moving on with the next and concluding part of this launch event that will consist of a fishbowl, or will take the form of a fishbowl. To start practicing with the Zoom reactions that we're going to use, I would like to ask you to use the yes or no reaction to let us know if you are familiar with this format for moderating discussions. And in the meantime, I would also like to ask Chiara, Gohar, and Elisa to get ready to answer to some potentially controversial statements. I see you're practicing your Zoom reaction skills, so thanks for that. And I will then get it started by shooting the first, we will see how controversial statements to the three members that accepted to provide with the first reaction. I will ask you to tell us if you agree or disagree with the statement, and then explain why in max 1 minute. But we also want to hear for those who are not so familiar with the fishbowl format, because I see many yes, but also not all people reacted. This in person would take the form of concentric circles, and in the first circle you would have me throwing these controversial statements to 3 people, but you would also see sitting in this first circle, but you will also see there an empty chair. And this chair would be up for anyone who wants to contribute to the discussion to be taken. So what is going to happen here is that we do not have, although Zoom developed and the LLP Secretariat mastered it very well, we still do not have a chair on Zoom. So what we're going to do is that we are going to ask you to raise your hands in case you would virtually want to occupy that chair and further contribute to the discussion. So we'll start with the first round that I hope will help clarify how this format works for those who are not super familiar with it. So the first statement that I'm gonna make is the following. To be fair to all students, give each an identical test. So I see Elisa, Gohar disagree. I can't see Chiara on my screen, but I'm sure she is reacting. Elisa, Gohar, would you like to say in 1 minute why you disagree?
Hi everyone, here is Elisa Briga from the European Federation for Intercultural Learning. I disagree because research has shown that learners learn differently, and especially those that have difficulties in learning because of dyslexia, for example, they absolutely need a different test.
Thanks also for the conciseness. Chiara, would you like to go next? I finally saw you did disagree as well.
Yes, of course. I mean, because every child is different, so we can't make a general test for testing every people. We don't do it for in our relationship. I mean, as adult, why we need to make individual, identical tests for everyone. And of course, it's not easy to apply personalized testing in the school environment, but I mean, there are some different tools that take into account every, the inner diversity of every child and every person, because we need to take care of, be in mind that we are in front of person, and assessment is made by two persons, child that be assessed and a teacher that has to assess him. So we need to take care also of the personal size.
Thanks a lot. Go ahead. What's your take on this?
Great. Yeah, I try to give my take. So I'm from the European University Association. That probably explains that I'll be talking about higher education students. So I certainly disagree with the fact that we need to give tests even to students, like similar tests to every student, because we are very much valuing student-centered and very personally developed approach to learning. And I think it is, of course, important to have fair assessment culture, so that there's no doubt about it, while testing is not really the way towards developing fair and efficient assessment culture, because we're not teaching for testing. It is important to like shift from the approach of teaching for testing towards assessment for learning. And we need to understand that students, learners actually can create new learning through the assessment process. So that will be my reasons of why I disagree really with the statement.
Thank you very much. And we'd like to hear also from Marie-Anne, that I saw also reacted negatively to the statement.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yeah, in 1 minute, if you can. Thanks.
Yes, I think I can agree with what the colleague said. There are always students that have specific needs, and you have to adapt to that and try to find your justice in another way, to make sure that everybody can have the same equity does not always mean equal testing, so that's goes without saying.
Okay, thank you. Well, this first round was very unanimous, I would say, at least in terms of those who did react, but let's see if it will be the case with the next statement as well, which is we should get rid of grades. Taking a little more time this time for people to react. So I'll start with Gohar this time, because I know she has to leave a little earlier than the others.
Okay. Well, again, speaking for university students, I don't think we need to get rid of grades, but we certainly need to reconsider what we are using the grades for. What are the grades indicating? Are they giving an opportunity for the learner to understand to what extent they have managed to learn the knowledge and show through an assessment how much of that they have learned? Do they manage to actually understand what is the point, like what is the part of the growth that they still need to go? Or is it just like a mark that, gets them into depression and doesn't say anything? So it's very much about how the teachers and the system is using grading for the purposes of actually promoting learning and understanding of how the learning is being assessed, rather than just using this as either, I don't know, a mark to create like super high level competition or stress among the students.
Thank you very much. I see Chiara and Elisa agree with this, but let's see. Let's hear why exactly. Elisa, 1 minute again.
I completely agree with Gohar and her reflections. We need grades. They motivate for many people. They are a trigger for further learning. They show you progress, but they need to be explained. And when I went to school, there was not much explanation on why you got certain grade.
Thank you. Chiara.
Yes, I mean, I fully agree. It's what I want to say. I mean, of course, we need greed to note and taking a note of the evaluation and grades. It depends on the grades are, I mean, and how we can use them and how we approach to grades. So my reply was more or less yes, no, it depends. It's not really no against, but it's not really yes, of course. I mean, depends.
All right, and shifting from depends to yes, I would like to ask Aria why she answered positively to the question.
Well, thank you very much. I think I said yes to the question because exactly for the reasons that have been mentioned. Grades are used too much without explanation and sometimes very randomly. And I think it's very difficult to get this into a more objective system. We sometimes have the impression that if there is a standardized exam and then there are standardized grades, that is objective, and it is not. Yeah. So I think that goes hand in hand, and seeing also the different grading systems throughout Europe. I mean, you have all sorts of grading systems that you then need to translate into each other when you want to recognize or validate something. I think that is highly problematic, and I think some kind of a pointing system that gives an information about what kind of courses you have done and how, like the ECTS at the university, that tells you actually how much work people have put into something. I think that's a fairer and a better information that is given out there than a grade. What does a grade 2 in Austria mean to somebody? Yeah, might send out a totally contradictory message to other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Aria. So Pete also reacted. No.
It's a no, but this with the ECTS, I would say as well no, because from my experience, the way to control ECTS and how each educator defines the level of work and engagement that you have could be as well, like for a lot of processes in schools, end up being a nightmare. But I think the core part here is like, how much do we count the engagement of students in their own learning, like the comments before with the assessment, like to be able to themselves identify the parts and the core parts of the grade. So I think that's a lot of space for work for educators on that part. And how would we count like something that is not being done, of course, now, but the extracurricular activities or the parts like organizations like FL or YFU or other organizations that are really engaging students in learning, and that is being ignored right now.
Thank you. I see Milvia wants to come in, but she did not react. So Milvia, could you react first so we know?
Hello, first of all.
Hello.
Congratulations for this very interesting afternoon and this very interesting seminar. Inspirational and I think full of insight in different inputs. From my point of view, I'm a sociologist. I'm an expert senior evaluator. I'm a member of the European Evaluation Society. I work in pedagogical projects in the Erasmus program and so on. Just to explain to you a bit my experience on the ground. Since
thank you, Milvia, but I am obliged to ask you to keep it short.
To be very
although it's of course very
sharp. I think we could survive without grades. I think that grades are something that comes from the past learning system, past evaluation score based on scores, on tests, standardized. Okay, I think the problem now is to be also practical, empirically practical, because the university system is not ready to take off the grades. And I think also the labor market is not ready to embrace, to select people who come from a schooling system without grades. So I think that the problem is to change the entire educational chain. And I think that in modern world, with climate change, with, let's say, importance of being alive in this world, and learn to live in a global society, we do not need grades. We, on the contrary, should lead all the people in the educational system to, in their own ways, to fit with the levels of each level, or each, how can I say, each requirement, minimum requirements to pass from a level to another in the schooling system, with maybe through project, maybe through community or group works, not only individual scores. And I think that we are perfectly able to do this, but the problem is all the system should change, and this is very difficult. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you. And I'll move on with the next statement, which is exam stress is good because it prepares you for stress in life. So I would like to hear, I see Chiara reacted already with a no. I don't know if it's a clear-cut no or a no with some depends in it. Chiara, what's the reason for it?
Yes, you're right. It depends. I mean, stress is already, I don't know, but if I remind myself, I remember how I was stressed when I already went to school. If I have some, something to do that for me, it has been difficult. For me, it's already a stress without being, even before be tested, you know. So, I mean, sometimes being in school and being in the process of learning is already stressful. And so in the school, in school activity, we already prepare students and learning to face the stress. I mean, it's not really so essential to make them having other stressful activity in order to prepare them. I mean, we have to guide them in dealing with the stress, and not producing them stress to be prepared in facing other stress. I mean, so even here, it depends, or it's
all right. And someone else answered yes, though. Elisa?
Yeah, so maybe provocative. In order to avoid stress, people need to know about it. So, and also it is part of life, in the sense that there's many situations outside of school that will not protect us from stress, and we need to somehow learn and detect stress to protect ourselves, to cope with it, to understand that it's coming up, to manage it, to organize our work, to live. But the important thing is that school doesn't exceed this, like we have heard in Ireland is happening. It's also, we need to learn what stress is on us, not to provoke it on others. In the workplace, asking others to overperform and put stress on others. And we need to know stress, to manage it and to control it.
Thank you, Lisa. Marianne, is this a no as an answer to this question, or the previous one? I'm not sure. Aria?
I'm not so sure, actually. Yeah.
So do you think
I agree basically with what has been put forward, so I don't have much.
So exam stress can be good. All right. And Aria, what do you think?
Well, I think also, as Chiara mentioned, it depends. We do that already to very small children, and we should think about doing that. I do agree that there are stressful situations out there in the world, and that we need to prepare, but we need to prepare gradually. And I don't think it's a good start to start with 6 and 7 years old in the first place. Secondly, there are different kinds of stress. There's the kind of stress that is really devastating you, and then there is a kind of healthy stress. We all know that when you take part in a competition, running or rowing or swimming or whatever, you also need a certain level of adrenaline in order to perform well. So I think we have to distinguish these kind of stresses, and I think what we don't want is this kind of affecting children mentally kind of stress that makes them actually unable to react and unable to cope well with the situation. And that is highly problematic, especially if we consider that lots of children or young people then take medication against stress, and that leads to far-reaching consequences throughout life.
Thank you, Arya. We will have one more, and I'll just mention it here so that it can be food for thought and maybe material for conversations for those that are joining the reception at the LLLP in about half an hour. And it is that peers' feedback is more important than teachers' feedback. I'll leave it there. Unfortunately, we're already 10 minutes late compared to the schedule. I would like to thank you all for your patience and staying with us till now. We know the Zoom fatigue is real, and we don't want you to get too much of it, because we want you to engage in the about 15 workshops and events that are happening this week in the frame of the LLL week. We have more than 800 participants that registered overall, so we're all looking forward to meet them throughout the week, as well as to interact with the dozens of stakeholders that accepted the invite to join the events, including policymakers, experts, of course, members of the LLLP. And on this note, a great thank you also to the about 15 members of the LLLP that engaged actively to organize workshops and panels. But a big shout out, of course, to the Secretariat of the LLLP itself for the great organization once again of this event. And also thank you to the speakers once again who joined us for this panel. Thank you, Pina, for presenting the position paper as well as introducing the LLL week. And we look forward to meeting you all. We don't know if at all the workshops that are going to take place, but most of them. And I'm sure you're going to find some that are going to catch your interest and draw your attention. Just so you know, it's still possible to register for the workshops. So if you didn't have the chance yet to go thoroughly through the program, please do so and do register for those that you're interested in. Thank you all once again, and see some of you at the reception in about 20-30 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Fabulous. Thank you.
Stand off.
Bye. Thank you.